Well, good afternoon, everybody. How's everyone doing? We're very excited to be talking about concentrates today because I have a belief that I know will get a lot of people angry at me. I think that concentrates are the most important segment of any cannabis market. You know, it's interesting. This is my third ICBC. The first two, I was on the panel this year. They asked me to moderate it, which is a great honor. And the first couple of years I came to ICBC, concentrates were verboten, right? They were banned here in Germany. And now concentrates are allowed somewhat. They're allowing some solventless methods. The pharmacists are starting to get into ethanol. And this is a trend, quite frankly, we see in a lot of markets where they take a very difficult, hard stance with concentrates, and eventually they start to allow more and more things. It's my belief that in probably 2 years, they'll be allowing hydrocarbon and all other sorts of methods here in Germany. But when you look at the EU, not just Germany, there's some great shifts that are going on. And part of what we're going to do today is focus on some of the strengths and inherent weaknesses of every system. One of the biggest points I want to leave everyone here is that there might not be any one perfect extraction method. All have their benefits and their drawbacks. And very often you might find that the most experienced operators will employ two different types, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I will say that as the market grows and you have Switzerland, of course, outside of the EU, allowing for recreational markets, there's also a large difference between medical grade products and recreational grade products. And we'll talk a little bit about that with our panel as well today. I will say that the importance of concentrates is clearly demonstrated when you look at the markets like France and Spain. Both of these countries have announced that they are going to, I don't want to say restrict, they are going to make it difficult to smoke flower for medical patients. They may only allow a tincture, they may allow some concentrated related product. And the reason for that is simple. When you smoke flower, and frankly, as I joke to people, whether you're smoking cannabis, tobacco, hemp, or you bought oregano and you thought it was cannabis, the minute you start to burn it, you generate over 20 carcinogens, starting with benzene. More importantly, you generate over 400% more tar from cannabis and hemp than you do from tobacco. So part of what concentrators and extractors can do is remove the parts of the plant, the fats, the lipids, and other constituents, chlorophylls, that cause those biological contaminants to be a problem. The questions that have been submitted from the group are quite varied, and I'd like to start introducing the panel here. We have my good friend Nick from Cannabis, and Nick is, excuse me, maybe I do want my carry around. Where is that microphone? So we have Nick from Cannabis, good friend. Nick is a specialist in building labs from the ground up. He has many different solvent methods that he works with. We have Jonah from Decimal. Jonah builds both CO2 systems, ethanol systems, hydrocarbon systems, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonah, you're venturing into the solventless world as well. We have Patrick from the JD Oil Company. Patrick's a consultant throughout the EU, very experienced in a variety of different extraction methods. We, of course, have Constantine, who not only knows quite a bit about extractions, but he's the inventor of the, and I'm going to let you pronounce this, Persino press, which is a very unique system of making rosin, which I'll let him describe. And then finally, we have Rohit. And Rohit is with Buffalo Systems. They're a very large company that make a range of extraction systems. I'll let him discuss in great detail. But let's start with Nick's questions here. Nick, one of the questions you asked was, when you're creating a lab, what are the primary bottlenecks and typical timelines for building out a European facility and launching cannabis concentrate lines?
Hi, so first of all, you need to design the space. You need to have a space, of course. Most of the facilities today, they are working with flowers. There are some facilities that have standalone extraction facilities. But let's say you are an established facility, you need to design the space. You need to select your extraction method and the final products you are targeting to introduce to the market. From the moment you are ready with the capital and the decision, you need to order the equipment, validate it, then you need to run it, you need to have the final products, you need to do stability tests on these products, You need to do the registration. Depending on the country within Europe, it takes some time.
You can do that all in about 3 or 4 months, right, Nick?
No. Sorry. But from the moment you are ready, I think a realistic to optimistic scenario is 2 years. With all the registration, depending on the market, especially if we're talking about medical market, it takes time. And it's a long process. Of course, there are some facilities, already established facilities, that have been doing this work, and they are preparing themselves beforehand, or they are entering the European market with this product, but it takes time for sure.
It does.
Yeah.
Before I came out here, I stopped by some other European processors, and it took them from when they got licensed to when they got their EU GMP almost 5 years. Almost 5 years. Now, I'm not suggesting that's what it's going to take everybody, but that's how tough it can be. And finally, Nick, what sort of EU GMP compliance or meeting, what sort of products are you seeing that are in demand in the EU market right now, the most demand?
The standard first product was the dropper for most of the facilities, with a liquid dropper. I think, as we know from other markets, the vape cartridges and edibles are picking up, so we expect to see more of that. We already start to see slowly the first vape products. And a classic product that is in the market, and in some countries like Germany and Holland, it's motivated by the authorities, is hash products. That is hash products.
Okay.
That is also part of it. Of course, there are going to be more different products, inhalers, patches, and every type of product is going to be introduced slowly, and some of them are already happening.
Great. Thank you. Jonah, which extraction methods and equipment maximize cost savings and production efficiency, and why?
So you already addressed this, Steve, but there's no simple answer. There's not one extraction method's better than the other. It really comes down to each company's individual goals, what products they want to make, what kind of throughput they want to achieve, what the regulatory landscape is, what their CapEx startup is, and there's advantages and disadvantages to all. So for example, like on the ethanol, if you're wanting to do bulk distillate or bulk ingredients, like that's typically going to be your most cost-effective that you can scale from that side. Some disadvantage of that is, it's either a little bit limited as far as products go, or it requires a lot of additional post-processing, additional refinement to make products from that side. On the hydrocarbon, I think it's really a very product diversification from that side. From a capital X in what you can make and produce, it's very versatile. You can make very terpene-rich products as well on that side. Some of the downside is there's usually more cost and time associated with whether it's C1, D1, or ATEX certified rooms. And a lot of it is a lot of hand-holding and education in new states or countries as well, too, because it concerns people a lot from that side, but it can very safely be done. And then from a CO2 standpoint, is typically that's really great at cannabinoid targeting and selection. Very well accepted in medical markets as well too. Additionally, very environmentally friendly, from that side, and just public perception, is strong with it. And then from a disadvantage standpoint, it comes to, sometimes the CapEx is more sometimes, and from a throughput standpoint when you're comparing it to other extraction methods. And then from a mechanical or solventless side is, I think that's really recognized as a premium craft product. It typically will command more money. It's a lower cost typically to get started in from that side as well. Some disadvantages, sometimes it can be harder to scale. I know Constantine's making some big improvements on that side too for scaling that side as well. And so there's a lot of different things to consider from that side when it comes to that. I think additionally too is it's not just the equipment, but it's all the downstream support equipment you have to consider as well too, when it comes to chillers, post-processing equipment as well. Those will all go into that. And of course, anytime you can reduce your labor or overhead when we're talking about profitability. And so there's also a lot of levels of automation that can be added to these things as well.
So you asked a very contentious question, and for a person who makes CO2 and hydrocarbon and ethanol and is about to get into the solventless, which method of extraction, in your opinion, is able to retain the most cannabinoids, and this is a two-part question, most cannabinoids and most terpenes?
I know this can be a debated topic, I think, in some ways. From my perception, I think hydrocarbon with the ultra low temperatures that they do, and the fact that you can also do fresh frozen with that side too, is that you get a very terpene-rich product from that side. But just back up one time, there's still not a perfect answer on this, by the way, because again, it comes to scale from that side, like how you're wanting to scale, what your end products are, all go into this as well. And then, like for example, in ethanol, like you could do a lot of bulk, but if you don't have tight control over your temperature, you can either destroy them, or you can degrade them, or you can convert other cannabinoids, from that side as well. And then there's post-processing that goes with reintroducing, that as well. And then obviously the mechanical and solvent list is very well respected for the terpene preservation, as well. And CO2 as well, because it can be very selective with it. So again, there's not a wrong method on this stuff. It just really comes to identifying your products.
Right. So I'm going to shift to Constantine here. And I know that Constantine has taken a process, and just for everyone's edification, I've read places that hashish is the oldest manufactured drug on earth and actually predates wine by over 1,000 years. And making standard hash is a time-aged process. But Constantine, you've come up with a new technology for making rosin, and my first question to you is what makes your technology different from standard? And in your explanation, if you could briefly explain how people are now making that nice white blonde rosin normally, and then how what you're doing is differently.
Currently, they use parchment paper in these delicate machines that are tabletop machines that weigh about 20, 30 kilos with low pressure. We have a system in which we use no parchment paper. We have stainless steel tops on our plates. We monitor the presses through the internet. We weigh before and after, and we're able to produce in ice water bubble hash 10 liters an hour. That's a lot. So these are big machines. These are 1,800-pound machines that are easily movable and can press any kind of material, anything, even bark, and without ruining the plates. So that's basically it.
That's a good answer. Knowing there's a yin and a yang to everything, what's the biggest drawback to your system? And if
I'm
you want
not
to
selling
that,
it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You got it? Okay. Am I here? Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm not selling it. We're doing rev share. That's the drawback, if you ask me, because we're looking to partner with people. If you have a license, we partner with you. I'm not selling it to everybody and anybody. We have multiple patents.
I would step in on that and say, in talking with Rohit asked some brilliant questions about things, and if we have time, we'll play in this about things like ROI. How much does it cost to build a facility? And that relates to what you're saying in the sense of what he does is a revenue sharing deal where you take a percentage of a person's revenue, because the cost of building a lab can have many zeros at the end of the right side of it. And so you can either build out your lab yourself, buy your equipment, or in your case, the person has to build out the lab, and then they share the equipment costs with you, or the revenue with you, and you fund the equipment. Is that right?
And we balance it out by the sheer volume, because we're producing so much. Just on plant material, we're 2 liters an hour, and on ice water bubble hash, we're 10 liters an hour. This is extreme.
So here's another contentious question. Can solventless compete with something like hydrocarbon extraction?
With those kind of numbers, yeah, it can surpass it. I mean, it can surpass it, and we can prove it. So come and talk to me.
Okay. Rohit, and again, I hope you remember some of your good questions if we have time, because we're all doing really good on answers. I appreciate that. What product categories are truly the most profitable categories in Europe, which is a very different market from the US or Canada, or Uruguay or Paraguay, versus the other markets being chased?
I think you have to look at it in 3 categories, right? The first category becomes the pharmaceutical oils. The second one becomes the vape distillates. And the third one becomes solventless hash and rosin products. And I think each of these categories, if you look on the technology side, each category will have different technologies that should be used. So let's say pharmaceuticals, you'll definitely need to do solventless, CO2, and things like that. If you're talking vape distillates, then a cryogenic ethanol or hydrocarbon can be a great system. And for hashish and rosin, of course, the cold water extraction sides.
Okay. One important thing I would add to what he was saying for those who aren't familiar is that in most extraction processes, you generally need to dry the biomass before you do an extraction. There's two main exceptions, and the biggest exception to that is hydrocarbon. And again, for all other systems, you'd run fresh. So I'm going to go back to what I started this workshop with today, and that is that if you look at employing two systems, possibly a rosin system, and then adding to that an ethanol or a hydrocarbon system, I have an analogy where we're in the marijuana mining business, and in that case, you can capture all the gold in our biomass rock. Rohit, what infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure, and just get a little bit into the costs of infrastructure, are going to be required to produce extracts and vapes?
I think, one of the things that operators or, manufacturing and extraction companies go wrong with is the payback period, right? A lot of times, they end up doing a 24-month payback cycle, which looks good on the spreadsheet, but in actuality, you're looking at more than 48 months. Right. At the same time, what you need to look at is your final product that you want to sell, your distribution strategy, and the markets that you want to sell in 3 years down the line, not right now. And your equipment comes last. You have to look at it in a way that the total capex required would be a 2x or a 2.5x of your equipment cost. So I think these are some of the pointers that you can look at when you're looking into the investment side of things.
I agree. I won't take my shirt off for everybody in the crowd today, but I have scars on my back, scars that I think every gentleman on this stage shares, and I know some faces in the room that have some of the same scars. These are scars that are made by markets we came into where flour was selling for $10, $15, $20 a gram, and oil was selling for thousands. Now I live in a market where I can buy a liter for under $1,000. Flour is selling for under $1 a gram. If you think it's not going to happen to you, let me tell you, it will. And what I want to suggest for everyone in the room is, as you're building these spreadsheets, understand if you can get into a market quickly, you can capture that wave and potentially do a return on investment very soon. But if it takes you 2 or 3 years to work through the GMP process, that wave tends to collapse in about 3 years. And I would encourage you to go look at Canada and the US and look at the prices in those markets and build your spreadsheets based on those low prices. And if you make more profit, that's great, but make sure that you focus on keeping your operating expenses down.
And Steve, I would just add to some of this
Sure.
as well too. And we have the good fortune and I guess the pain of, I've been in it for 14 years. A lot of my colleagues have been in it for a long time. And so we've seen a lot in different markets. And typically history will repeat itself. And why things feel like they're moving slow here in Europe, and they are, it'll pick up momentum pretty quickly over time. And the market can be, especially I know a lot of what we're talking about is medical, but ultimately a lot of stuff will probably end up to some sort of social or recreational. And that market can be very finicky and it can move very quickly and change. And you don't want to be caught where you're chasing your tail, to your point, to where all of a sudden, oh, this new product is popular, and then you spend 12 months getting implemented, and then it shifts again. So the most important advice I could give is, from the beginning, setting yourself up to be the most, to have the most diversity you can, to be able to quickly adapt and pivot with the market, and that's going to allow you to capture a lot more profits.
You hit a key point. So again, there's this medical pharmaceutical market. I had a good friend of mine, I don't know if Jao was in the room today, but he sent me a price list from the pharmacists in Spain, and I'm not even going to tell you what the prices are, but they're crazy high. And that's a medical price, and then there's recreational. They're two different animals. But my question, Rahit, to you is, when you're building a medical-grade facility and you're producing an API, an approved pharmaceutical ingredient for your customer, what's the difference between making and building an API facility and just building a rec facility?
I think it's a big difference, right? Because you're looking at, if you're talking in terms of the Europe, right, you're looking at European pharmacopoeia, you're looking at the EU GMP standards, you're looking at 21 CFR Part 11 standards. So your equipment needs to be compliant with all those laws. At the same time, your facility designs, your movement patterns with the staff that's working in the facilities need to be aligned with all those EU GMP and 21 CFR standards. And if you're using solvents like ethanol or hydrocarbon, then you're looking at ATEX compliances and things like that. So I think compliance becomes a very big part when it comes to the medical side of things.
Good answer. Patrick,
Yes, sir.
would you consider solventless to be the closest thing to a true API product? Or would it be the furthest from it?
Solvent or solventless? Sorry.
Well, when I say, and maybe I asked the question wrong, solventless, I meant to say solventless, yeah.
Solventless is a pure fingerprint. I always call it like not a full spectrum. I call it complete spectrum as a pure fingerprint of the plant at that stage, because you're not changing or modifying anything on the terpenes themselves and on the secondary ingredients. So you're really taking a fingerprint out of a either fresh plant or a dry plant. It doesn't matter. In that case, it's like from that standpoint on, it's a fingerprint of that stage.
Right.
So you have different ways of approach of your starting material, which defines the end product, but it is a pure fingerprint of that at that point without changing anything. So it is an active ingredient at that point where it is easy for the authorities to explain because they are already used to flour.
Right.
And especially under EU GMP, it's more like declaration of the processes and have them understand from a pharmaceutical standpoint what your goal is, what you want to achieve.
Okay. And to kind of put this last point to bed, maybe not completely for today, but what would you consider to be the key points of debate between solventless and solvent-based systems?
That's not so easy to explain because, as you already said, it is all about what you put in. If you want to do your waste stream purifying and get out of a flour production, you're using a waste stream and make money out of it. And or if you want to do like a craft product where you have other input, and then on the back end, it depends on what you're talking about in API, your final product should be. And that defines which method you have to use. So it's nice to have like a fully solventless product, but if you're using droppers, you get in a bad taste in some of them, so it's easier to work with the distillate or liquid diamonds or any other kind of pure THC ingredient. But if you want to have the benefits of the secondaries and all the other volatile organic compounds which are in the plant, then it's easier or better to go for a hydrocarbon or a solventless extraction method.
Okay. And for those of you that aren't familiar, there's a concept, in fact, I have a friend of mine who's got the patent on it. It's called liquid diamonds. And in the hydrocarbon world, you do a hydrocarbon extraction and you separate the terpenes from the cannabinoids. There's a couple different ways to do that. And when you start to separate the cannabinoids, they actually start to crystallize right in your vessel. And if you do it properly, you can crystallize your THCA in about an hour or two. I mean, you can spend days doing it, but you can do it quickly. And then you can apply heat to decarboxylate that THCA into THC. And the interesting thing is, you started with a pure 99.5% THC, and now you have a 99.5% THC, or excuse me, starting with THCA, now you have a 95% THC. So there's ways to purify things in certain extraction methods, and you can do that with rosin as well, right? I mean, that's a process you can do. Or the challenge with doing that with CO2, correct me if I'm wrong, Reed, is that you're drying your product generally before you're putting it in, and so it's already decarboxylated. You're not going to get to that THCA. Nick, would you?
There are options to do it without decarboxylate. The classic CO2 extraction is with a decarboxylated material, and for pharmaceutical products, most of the time that's the path. But there are ways to start with a non-decarboxylated material and do a co-solvent extraction where you get a almost full extract type of product.
So what Nick's talking about, one of the fastest growing areas of extraction is actually mixing things like ethanol into the CO2 process, and it greatly increases the power. So I had one question, then I'm going to go to the audience, and my question is, and this is a pretty technical question for those who haven't spent time in the labs, which residual chemicals remain in solvent-based systems, and which residual biological contaminants remain in the more mechanical methods of extraction? And I'm going to open that up to everyone in the panel. So basically, what's the impurities of your process? And let's start with rosin. If someone's going to test rosin in terms of biological, there won't be any residual solvents, obviously, although terpenes are a solvent. But what other biological things might, for instance, get a rosin batch to fail?
Bad input, garbage, tainted product, the water with the plants, it's got metals in there. That's it. If it's clean going in, it's clean going out.
Okay.
That's it.
I would add to that before I get to your answer, sir, is that a lot of people look to extraction to remediate those failed flower lots. Because even when I'll promote rosin here, if you run it through a 1 micron filter, you could remove things like alpha toxins, mycotoxins, and other types of elements, but that's another story. So what do you think? What sort of elements are staying in certain extracts after they've been produced?
Yeah, as I already mentioned, it's a fingerprint of the plant at that stage.
Right.
So fire in, fire out.
Right.
That's the most
Garbage in, garbage out.
exact. It depends. You can use trim and still get out a really good hydrocarbon extract. So, but if we're talking solventless, you got your fingerprint, and if you got microbials in there, you're pushing them through into your rosin. And then it's your process of your input material. If you're not properly doing your mechanic separation or ice water extraction or whatever, you're having impurities in that. So again, fire in, fire out.
What about molds? Are you getting a mold problem post-rosin press at all?
Of course, it could be.
Does happen.
If your water hash wasn't dried properly, you still got water contaminants in there or residues. And if you're pressing those water residues into your rosin, of course it can mold.
Right. So Nick, and I know that you three guys all are in different worlds, but I'm going to ask you specifically, what do you think remains in the CO2 process?
It depends what you consider. For sure, the CO2 process comes out with a lot of waxes. Maybe you don't want these waxes, most probably, to be there, and lipids. Of course, with CO2, you consider the whole process as a stage process, and we can discuss, and we've discussed about different filtration methods with classic filters or more advanced filters. So the thing is, you see the total process from start to finish. And depending on your final products, if you want to do distillate and use the distillate, you remove more impurities. If you want to do API, maybe you go to chromatography or CPC, or you choose another method to separate completely the cannabinoids. So it's a matter of post-extraction as well, what's happening. And of course, garbage in, garbage out is always
Luckily,
important.
chromatography isn't very expensive or hard, right? It's
But I
very
think,
hard. I will say before, is that you can actually do chromatography with CO2. So for all the rocks that people throw at CO2, it has many, many benefits. If you would be willing to take ethanol.
Sure. So I just wanted to add what Nick was saying, right? Of course, CO2 gets out the waxes and things, but if you have different separators working at different pressures and temperatures, right, at the separation stage, then you can, of course, separate your APIs or your fractional oils and the waxes separately. So that technically becomes like an advantage also for the CO2 system. And on the cryoethanol side, I think chlorophylls and waxes is something that ethanol definitely absorbs. But then if you have the right filtration skids within the ethanol system, then you can easily get rid of it. The biggest killer is, of course, moisture, right? And it's directly related with your yield percentage. So the more moisture you have, the less yield you'll get.
Okay. And Jonah, I'm going to throw butane at you only because I know people think butane is dangerous. What is left over in that BHO that's dangerous?
At the end, nothing. But I mean, you will have to typically do some purging, on that side. And there's different ways to purge and remove any butane or propane or even perhaps pentane as well, depending on your process. And I think it's important for everyone to remember, like this isn't a novel extraction as far as like to cannabis. Like this is being used on food, pharmaceuticals, coffee, and so it's probably cannabis is held to a higher standard. I'd say if you were to probably test some of the food products, like cannabis is more strict, and we can get to a non-detect.
I will add one thing to the group, and this is from personal experience. I've grown cannabis and hemp in 20-acre fields, and I've had soil that was certified organic. I've grown flower that passed QA for pesticides and heavy metals. But when I extracted it, everything inside that plant gets turned up by a factor of 4 or 5. And suddenly there was a pesticide that passed in the flower that made the oil fail. And so I will tell you with concentrates, because we're concentrating everything, that is an issue to consider. The good news is there are ways to remediate that through various things we will not get into today. So before I go any further, I'd like to open up maybe questions to the group. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask in our last 4 minutes, sir?
Hi, how's everyone doing? I'll try to make this as easy as possible. It's kind of a multifaceted question, so everybody will probably be able to contribute and answer. Especially for European pharmacopoeia, and as it becomes medical in some of these countries, right? It's kind of a strict medical policy. I want to know everyone's opinion on. I'm not trying to group up any one type of extraction. Familiar with all of them, but I guess if we were to say from a medical standpoint, if you're looking at solvent extraction versus non-solvent extraction, right? It's a pretty well-known fact that solvent extraction could have residual solvents, which could have a neurological effect with some of these. And then rosin is known to carry a lot of fats, waxes, and lipids, which also contributes to its flavor, right? This is where a lot of the good flavor comes from. But I'd like to know everyone's opinion on, for the end user, not just from a monetary standpoint, but from a moral standpoint, right? When you're giving these products to end users that are looking for a medical benefit, would you say that, if you had to pick, would you say that potentially the carcinogens that could come from the undesirables in rosin are less or more than the potential residual solvents that could be in hydrocarbon, not really CO2, but ethanol hydrocarbon extraction? Does that make sense?
Anybody want to take that? Question is, which more dangerous? The chemical residual solvents or the biological remaining?
What's more dangerous, chemicals or no chemicals? Let's talk about that. You have a plant, you're extracting the oil. You tell me. It's kind of basic.
I don't think it's probably that simple though, because if you are truly removing all the solvents and then there are carcinogens, then it's not just probably a simple answer like that.
And I guess it's also the amount. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's a tiny, tiny amount of
exactly.
butane, and that it's similar, let's say, to the lighter or something,
Yeah.
and there is a lot of waxes that you're inhaling, what is worst? I mean, it's not a simple answer, and it's a matter of quantity also, I guess, also.
Well, I'll throw one in the mix. It's not a cannabinoid. Go read the newspaper and go Google vitamin E acetate. Vitamin E acetate was used as a cut because terpenes cost thousands of dollars a liter, and I can buy barrels of vitamin E acetate for $40 a barrel. And so what people would do is they'd use vitamin E acetate because it was an approved FDA and European approved additive for food. But no one ever smoked vitamin E acetate. And when they did, it produced a noxious poison. Sir, could you move down here, please? I want to walk up all those stairs. But the vitamin E acetate actually poisoned people and killed some people. It wasn't even the cannabinoid. It was the cut that was used in the vape cart to get the right viscosity. So I'm going to encourage you all to take a careful look at the entire ingredient list that you're putting in your patient's products.
This is a question for the entire panel. You've talked a little bit about the European market and also your perspectives on it for the consumer-facing non-medical side. So my question, kind of maybe a good segue for the next talk on regulation. What is your assessment of the situation that on this Monday, the second European research agency has actually 2 days ago advised the European government to ban all CBD-containing products for cosmetics, both orally and outside, with a tolerance degree of 0.0%. This is news, like this is yesterday. And the perspectives, both from a technical standpoint and a market standpoint, on how that's going to affect this industry.
Anyone want to take that bag of goods?
I think it's really going to come down to the raw materials that are being used, right? If the legislations are changing towards the percentages of CBD or THC in a product, then, again, what goes in comes out. So it really depends on the kind of raw material that you're able to use in whatever technology that's available.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. If you have any questions, I want to encourage you to go to your guide, try to find the panels of these fine gentlemen. I'll also be at my booth as well. And if you have any questions, we'll hang around a little bit outside. Thank you, and have a good show.
Steve Fuhr doing my job. Let's hear it for Steve Fuhr and the whole panel one more time. That was great. This is the International Cannabis Business Conference Berlin. You're going to take a picture. Jan's right there.